And we're back with our conversations with great minds. I'm speaking with award-winning writer and social commentator Larry Beinhart, the man behind the movie Wag the Dog and many other great works. Larry, the last time you and I talked was actually on my radio show some time ago, maybe a year or so ago. You were writing about how you had observed that whenever taxes on the rich and the super rich were above at least 50%, that economies stabilized, and that when they went below that, that the risk value, you know, money was cheap, it was easy, people were looking for more risk, and economies destabilized. I'm curious if you're still of that opinion. Your research seemed pretty solid to me, and you know, your thoughts about this moment in time.
Okay. During the last few years of political campaigns, every politician I've listened to has said, we need tax cuts to stimulate the economy, we need tax cuts to stimulate the economy, and blah, 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 blah. So I said, that's an interesting statement. Let me go look. And if you go look, you see that if we have a major tax cut, and there have been basically 4 of them, you get the same sequence. After World War I, our top marginal tax rate was up around 70%. In the 1920s, they start cutting it all the way down in 1925 to 25%. 4 years later, it's 1929, and what you've had is a big bubble and then a crash. Crash including bank failures, and in that case, a depression. Okay. After this, tax rates start going up, and during World War II, they end up around 90%, and they stay that way through 1964, where you have the Kennedy-Johnson tax cuts. They're really done by Johnson. And he cuts the top rate down to 70%. And what you have right after that is you have a bubble, and you have a crash. And then you have a 20-year period of relatively flat growth. If you look at the Dow Jones average, at the beginning of that period, it's fluctuating between 600 and 1,000. If you get to it 20 years later, it's still fluctuating between 600 and 1,000. Okay, Ronald Reagan comes into office. Ronald Reagan starts cutting, and he takes it down from 70% down to 50, down to 35, and then even lower. And what you get is you get a stock market bubble, you get a bubble in the fiscal sector and in banking, and then you get a crash with bank failures, which were called the biggest bank failures since the Great Depression. It was the savings and loan debacle, and we had to bail them out. Then George Bush I raises taxes slightly, then Clinton comes in, raises them more, the economy recovers. Then the Republicans force Clinton to make a cut in the capital gains tax. And I picked this up from, I think, the Heritage Institute, who wanted to say that Clinton didn't deserve credit for the economy. The Republicans did for cutting the capital gains tax. But what happens at that point is that the dot-com boom turns into the dot-com bubble, because there's just too much cash around. It's all running to the hot spot, and you get the crash. And then George Bush II comes in, and he starts cutting taxes. And what you get is, first you get a crash, which is kind of a continuation of the dot-com bubble. Then you have what's called the Bush recovery, which was the mysterious recovery with no jobs, but the market starts going up. It never gets back as high as it was under Clinton, but it starts going up until it turns into a bubble. And there's a huge financial bubble in the United States. It's in real estate, it's in banking, it's in these derivatives, a whole bunch of stuff. And it crashes. This makes you want to, and we're still in that crash. And it makes you want to take a look back at depressions and recessions and say, what effect does tax policy have? Because in all conversations about depressions and recessions, everybody says, you don't raise taxes during a depression. We learned that from Herbert Hoover in 1932. Well, in point of fact, if you look at tax hikes, they always, a year later, from the passage of the tax hike to when the tax hike goes into effect, the recession or depression bottoms out and the recovery begins.
Yeah. I find this absolutely fascinating.
It happens a year after Hoover leaves and Roosevelt is in, but Hoover's already raised taxes. It happens when George Bush I raises taxes, and he doesn't do it because he wants the economy to recover. Okay?
Yeah.
Both of those guys did it because they were concerned about deficits.
Yeah, Larry, I think there's a huge lesson here that, A, we need to tell all the economists, and B, we need to tell the politicians. We just have about 6.5 minutes left, and there's a couple of other topics I'd like to bounce off. The first is your new book, Salvation Boulevard, which is already the rights to the movie. In fact, the movie apparently is already being made right now. You have the
It's
victim.
been shot.
Go ahead.
It's been shot. I think they're locking down the final edit as we speak.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so the victim is an atheist, the suspect is a Muslim, the lawyer is a Jew, and the investigator is a fundamentalist Christian, and the mystery is God. This is the message that we're getting. Riff on that for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. After I started thinking about this back in, I guess, '79, when we had the Iranian Revolution, and we had the first new theocracy in, I don't know, 400 or 500 years. And then along comes 9/11. And we once again see religion returning as a cause for war. And the obvious questions, the questions that stare you in the face, that beg to be answered are, what is it about religion that people are willing to kill and die for it? There's an apocryphal quote. I've never been able to find the real source for it, is that having a religious war is like kids fighting about who has the better imaginary friend. Mm-hmm. And yet, we are once again returned to a time when people are killing and dying over who has the better imaginary friend. So the response to 9/11 should have been, why does this make people kill and be willing to die, and why has it returned to political prominence now? And these questions were not asked. Instead, the response was to counter that religiosity with our religiosity and turn it into, in the words of George Bush, a crusade. You know, back to the 14th century, like a bad acid flashback. And so I thought this was the most interesting question in the world. So I tried to write a book that would explore how religion and the structure of faith, or lack thereof, determines what people are willing to do.
That's fascinating. I'm looking forward to the movie and to reading the book. Larry, another thought. You've spoken out about 9/11. You've certainly spoken out extensively about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm curious your thoughts, and you were just now talking about 9/11. I'm curious your thoughts on the Anthrax attack. The only two guys who stood in the way of the Patriot Act were Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, and Pat Leahy. Pat Leahy was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And so the Patriot Act had to get through Leahy, and he had already said he was not inclined to do that. And then it had to get through Daschle to be brought to the floor to be voted on, and, post 9/11. But these two guys were pushing back, and they were the only two people in the entire United States, outside of a couple of journalists, they're the only two politicians who got anthrax in the mail. Is there a novel there? We've got about 2 minutes here, Larry.
You know, I think that's the stuff out of which fiction is made. It might be true. It might be true. But, you know, there is enough stuff, enough insane, incredible, not to be believed bullshit out on the public record to discuss and to reveal and to bring into prominence, you know, like the fact that we've never examined the nature of religion, like nobody wants to go back to the actual record and see if tax cuts do stimulate the economy or they just create bubbles. You know, there's plenty out there, and I prefer to work with things that I don't have to go to conspiracy theory with. Not because I'm against it, it's fun, but because there's so much astonishing stuff right in front of your face.
Yeah. Well, in 30 seconds or so here, what's the astonishing stuff you're looking at right now, Larry Beinhart?
You know, again, I think economic policy is one. I think the fact that in the media there is no such thing as objective reality. There are only competing quotes. This is a very, very dangerous thing. I wrote about it in Fog Facts, and I thought that there was some movement in the mainstream media to say, yeah, there are objective facts, and it's not just a question of can John Boner repeat the same thing more times than Obama. But the only place, outside of your show, of course, where you'll find the news media looking at objective reality, the facts as opposed to the quotations, is on The Daily Show.
Yeah.
And that's why The Daily Show becomes the preferred news source.
Yeah, it's the old court jester
New York
thing,
Times,
I think. You know,
CBS,
the court jester historically was the only person who was allowed to speak back to the king and not lose his head. Larry Beinhart, thanks so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you, Tom.